Morning, everybody.
Morning.
We have, at least at this moment, a relatively small group. We will see if that expands. I don't know whether the time change may be mixing people up. I also don't know whether it has anything to do with the fact that one of the greatest baseball games happened last night. I was up till past midnight watching it. It was not the result I hoped for, but it was one amazing game. So um, if people are recovering from that, I certainly sympathize. And so it's all good. Um, but all right, now we're getting we're getting some more people. That's good. Always happy for everybody to join. We are continuing our discussion on Jewish prayer. Assuming there aren't questions from anything that we may have talked about before, if there are any um, uh, leftover queries from last time.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, sorry. Is there a question? Just want to make sure. Okay. So just a friendly reminder, we have obviously entered the month of November, and we're still going to obviously continue this from Sunday to Sunday. I am going to make an exception on the Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. So there will not be class on Sunday. I believe it'll be November 30th. Um, so just figure on that. And yeah, we will go from there. What I'll do is let's bring up the slide that we had last time, which had this prayer structure, which I know we began to talk about last time. We really talked about sort of the heart of the service, meaning the Shema and the Amidah. Really, what you see in the pretty much the middle of this handout. Um, Now, a couple of things I didn't mention regarding the Shema. You have this idea here, and let me pull up the pen so I can note that here. So you have, so what do okay. Um, if you look at the little highlight there, the first blessing before the Shema, then there's this part that says the second blessing before the Shema, and then there's a blessing after the Shema. So what's all that about? Um, those were again, when you're talking about what you find here in the sort of the middle of this graphic, um, these were all things that were pretty well established a couple thousand years ago or so. This idea that you have the Shema and the Amidah, of course, and then you also have um, these blessings before and after the Shema. Now, a reminder in case I haven't mentioned it. Um, Sorry, question? All right. Anyway, feel free to ask questions and feel free to interrupt me. It's all good. Um, so the the idea is that in terms of a blessing, what we're talking about are the words specifically Baruch Atah Adonai, which means blessed are you or praised are you, Adonai, God. And then something that follows that. When we talk about a blessing, almost always we're talking about something like a sentence that has that preamble leading up to it. Sometimes it is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, which is blessed are you Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, God and sovereign of the universe. And then the end of it is what exactly you're praising, blessing, etc. That's generally what we mean by a blessing. There are, there are other ways to, to think about it, and it's not entirely based on that. Um, but generally, when you see Baruch Atah Adonai, you say to yourself, okay, this is a blessing. Um, and so, regarding that, when it comes to blessings, there is a general goal that some rabbis have, some rabbinic thought has mentioned that you should have a goal of saying 100 blessings per day. In other words, that over the course of a day, you should find reasons to say this Baruch Atah Adonai formula 100 times in a day. And now that's a lot because not there aren't a lot of built-in opportunities to say that combination. However, if one is praying 3 times a day, saying the Amidah, saying the prayers leading up to it and after it, etc. Um, and if one is eating and saying blessings before and after food, which is another topic, um, if you're doing those things, then you're getting pretty close to 100 per day. I don't know many people who take that idea so seriously. However, the sentiment, at least, is a respectable sentiment. In other words, it is an encouragement, of course, to pray regularly and also to be thankful on a regular basis and to be cognizant of the role that you believe that God has in our world on a regular basis. So, is anybody keeping tabs? Okay, all right, you made 73 blessings today, you made 24 the next day. Here's how you're doing in terms of the standings or whatever.
I have an app.
You have an app?
Yeah.
Tell me about your app.
No, I'm teasing.
You have an app? Oh, no, no, no. I mean, by the way, it would not. I mean, no. I mean, I appreciate the humor. I appreciate the humor. It would not surprise me, honestly.
It's
It
like
would.
getting your 10,000 steps in.
Yeah, it would totally not surprise me if there's an app. Maybe somebody's working on it right now. So no, no, so no, it's all good. Um, anyway, so I wanted to talk about sort of the formulation of the blessing. So in a service that takes place in the morning, you are saying 2 blessings prior to the Shema, and then 1 blessing after the Shema before the Amidah. The first blessing before the Shema is a recognition of God creating the world and creating the world anew, and then the idea of providing light. Obviously, light being the very first act of creation according to the Torah. The second one refers to um, God's love and appreciation of the people of Israel. Um, and then the one after the Shema, but before the Amidah, is this idea that God has redeemed us. So usually there's a mention, at least at some point of the redemption from slavery in Egypt. I mean, that is the formative notion of redemption. Um, so anyway, I wanted to make sure that those things were, included in this. Now, okay, so the question that might come up is if the Shema and the Amidah, if those are the really, if basically this is the heart of it, and this is basically what people had to do in terms of at least morning prayer every morning. Um, what's the rest of this about? What's the rest of this? Now, if somebody could jump in, did I mention anything about Kaddishes last time?
No.
I didn't think I had, so I appreciate it. Yeah, so I don't think I had. So let's talk about Kaddishes and their function in the service. And when we talk about Kaddish, we are, we're talking about a pretty, important element in terms of prayer. There are several Kaddishes that are mentioned here, although these aren't necessarily the only places where we have them in the service. Okay, so what is a Kaddish? A Kaddish is a prayer that essentially the point of it is to acknowledge the importance of praising God's name. It begins with the phrase Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemeh rabbah, which means great and holy is the name, is the great name. Not the greatest translation, but that's essentially that's essentially the goal of it. Um, now, if that phrase sounds maybe a little different than some of the other Hebrew words or phrases I may have mentioned, uh, you're correct because it is actually in a different language. The Kaddish is written in a language that uses Hebrew characters. So you pronounce everything the same way that you would pronounce Hebrew, but it is written in the ancient language of Aramaic. Aramaic, for Jews a couple thousand years ago, was the lingua franca. That was basically the everyday conversational language that people spoke in. At least Jews in the Middle Eastern areas where they were living. It became so important for people to recite the Kaddish in vernacular, in the language that people spoke and understood, that it was written in that language. Now, the funny thing is, of course, is that, you know, nobody speaks Aramaic today, at least nobody that I'm aware of. I mean, it's kind of like Latin, it's only really studied for the sake of doing further study of things that were written in that language in other times. But
Can I just,
pe- yeah.
I had a when I was in taxation, I had a taxpayer once who was Assyrian, not Syrian, but Assyrian.
Mhm.
And he told me that they still speak Aramaic.
Really,
I have
really,
no idea where Assyria is because he was living here, obviously, in the United States at the time. But
yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I could look it up.
Well, I no, sure, no, and I appreciate that. I would
Seems a
well,
little weird, but
what I would suggest is that I don't know a lot of Jews who are actually talking to each other in Aramaic these days. I'll put it that way. Again, I could be wrong, but it's certainly not widespread. I'll put it this way. When Eliezer ben Yehuda, an important Jewish figure of the late 19th century, when he made it a mission to have a common language for Jews to relate to one another, he chose Hebrew and not Aramaic and not Yiddish or not Ladino or not any other language that Jews in certain parts and certain times that he said, if we're going to go back to a language, if we're going to develop an everyday Jewish language, it needs to be Hebrew. So Aramaic was certainly passed by at that point. So the irony, I guess, is that it became so important to say the Kaddish in the language people spoke, so they wrote it in Aramaic. Here we are now, at least us, speaking English, and we don't say it in English. We still say it in Aramaic, so it's kind of an irony on that front. So,
Rabbi,
yeah, yeah.
um, I looked it up and it says that Assyrians speak a variety of Neo-Aramaic languages, which
Ah,
are descendants of the ancient Aramaic language that was widely spoken in the ancient Middle East. So I guess it's like a
Yeah.
form or how it's sort of developed.
Yeah.
mhm.
Your chat says that Assyrian Neo-Aramaic is spoken by communities in Iraq, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and by large diasporas in the US, Australia, Europe, and elsewhere. Who knew?
Hmm.
Anyway,
Oh, okay. Yeah, no,
go ahead.
well, I'll put it this way. I certainly appreciate everybody look it up. Um I'll put it this way. I have not been in a place where I walk into a room where there are Jews talking to each other and they're just rhapsodizing in Aramaic. I have not seen that. I mean, and does it exist? I mean, maybe it does, but I haven't seen it. I don't think it's that widespread, at least among Jewish populations at this point. Um, but it was a couple thousand years ago. Anyhow, so I so I talked about so the Kaddish. So I circled this half Kaddish, full Kaddish, mourner's Kaddish. Um, and they are it's the same prayer, just in somewhat different forms. The half Kaddish is, like the name implies, it's basically the first half of what we call the full Kaddish, right? And then the mourner's Kaddish is, I would say, about three-quarters of what the full Kaddish is. And I'll get into that function in a moment. But one thing I can tell you is that if you hear the half Kaddish or Chatzi Kaddish, they put that in a service to tell you that we are about to start a new section of the prayer service. So if you hear Chatzi Kaddish, the idea is that we are about to go into a new section. When you hear Kaddish Shalem, a full Kaddish, that's when you know that we are concluding a section of the prayer service. Now, if you hear a full Kaddish, that doesn't necessarily mean that the service is necessarily done, but it means that whatever section we'd been doing is now concluding, or at least getting really close to concluding. So they form these bookends, if you will. Now, mourner's Kaddish. Mourner's Kaddish is recited by those who have either lost a loved one, a close loved one in the last year, or if it's the anniversary of the death of a loved one. an anniversary according to the Hebrew calendar. Now, what constitutes a loved one? There is a purposeful distinction that is made among traditional texts that essentially says that there are four major categories of a what it means of the importance of saying Kaddish of these particular close relatives. The idea is to say it either for a parent who has passed, for a spouse that has passed, for a sibling that has passed, or God forbid, if one of your children may have predeceased you. Those are the major categories. Now, it is not inappropriate. I think it is actually reasonable to expand those categories. I'll get to that in a second. But an important thing to know about mourner's Kaddish, and then all the Kaddishes actually, which is that you have to have a minyan. You have to have at least 10 Jewish adults at your service in order to recite any Kaddish. The idea of the Kaddish is that you're declaring it before a community. And the way that Jews define community means at least 10 Jewish adults.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
why the number 10? Is there a
Why,
significance to 10?
why the number 10? So there are some ideas. One idea is that it represents the original 10 Midwestern colleges that made up the Big Ten. I know that now there are 18, and that's kind of ridiculous. Obviously, I'm kidding. There are a couple of other real reasons. One, the most prominent reason that you're going to hear, which is probably apocryphal, it is the when Abraham, this is actually something that's going to come up in the Torah portion of this coming Saturday. When Abraham is talking to God, when God is telling Abraham, "Hey, I'm going to destroy these wicked cities of Sodom and Sodom and Amorah, Sodom and Gomorrah," and then Abraham says, "Well, hmm." Uh, Let me ask you, if you could find 50 good people in those cities, would you change your mind and not destroy them? And God says, yeah, sure. Okay, that's fine. And then Abraham says, well, okay, come on. If you find 40 good people, and like Abraham basically tries to sort of whittle it down. And when Abraham says, okay, if you find 10 good people in Sodom and Gomorrah, will that will you be sure not to destroy the cities? And God says, okay, fine. And that's where Abraham stops bargaining. Abraham doesn't go beyond that. He doesn't say, well, what if you find seven? Abraham stops at 10. Now, maybe Abraham figures, all right, I've pushed God far enough. I'm not going to press my luck. Or who know, I mean, who it doesn't really explain Abraham's thinking on his debating strategy. But that idea of 10 is one that I mean, there are some people who think that that's really, that's one of the origins of the number. Now, I know that there are other arguments about it. I'm not recalling them at the top of my head. Other reasons why 10 becomes the number. Um, uh, I was mentioning this to at least a couple of you during the week. I think that the fact that we have a number at all, the fact that we have the number 10, but even if we had wound up at the number 5 or 20 or whatever it is, whatever we would have come to, the fact that we have a number where we say this is the limit, or not the limit, this is the minimum of what it means to have a community, um, is one of the most important things in Jewish life. And without it, the entire notion of a synagogue might disappear. Because one of the things that, one of the reasons, one of the great motivations for many Jews to attend services, those who don't attend services necessarily on a regular basis, but you will find over the course of any given year, numerous Jews who they might not pray regularly, but they do make a point of attending services when they need to recite the mourner's Kaddish, when they've lost a loved one and or when it is the anniversary of somebody's death. I think if we simply said, okay, well, you don't have to have a minyan. You don't have to have 10 people to say Kaddish. You can just say it by yourself or what have you. I think that if we were to allow that, the whole motivation of ensuring that we have enough people at services would go out the window. And that would weaken the entire structure of a synagogue, especially in mid-size or small Jewish communities. The motivation for people to say mourner's Kaddish when it is their time to do so is very strong. And the fact that we have created this rule, whether we should have picked the number 10 or whether we should have picked the number 17, I don't know. We have the number 10. That's what we have. And it does at least help motivate us to check in, to be a part of services, to be a part of something beyond just our own respective, our own needs. There are many people who have at different times enjoyed, like really appreciated the fact that people showed up to a service that they themselves really wanted to make sure that there was a minyan so they could say Kaddish. That person oftentimes will then pay it forward and try to show up at other times when other people need help having enough people for services. That's a huge motivating factor. Um, so anyway, so no, good question on Minion. Um, you do realize, I hope, that when I refer to Minion, minyan means a quorum. In other words, of a gathering of 10 Jewish adults. I'm not referring to those yellow pill-shaped creatures in all of the Despicable Me movies that are very cute yet and completely unintelligible. I'm not referring to those kind of minions.
Rabbi,
Yes,
I've got my usual tangent that
go
I
for it.
still don't feel like I'm really clear on. Looking at this and assuming you've got your 10 Jewish adults, you're looking at a 2-hour service even before the rabbi gets to speak or announcements. Or is there any way they can go and get shorter than that?
So, um, Can you do a full service in under 2 hours? Is that what you're asking?
Well, my guess is 2 hours. You may say, "Oh, I can do it in 45 minutes," but to me, it seems like it's always 2 hours.
Well, on a Saturday morning, usually,
Yeah.
2 hours is sort of the minimum. I mean, when I do a traditional service at Heskamuna, I would say that that like 2:15, 2:30 is the typical length of what I do, which includes what I think is a relatively modest length in terms of a sermon, like 10, 15 minutes.
You're pretty quick. Yeah.
Okay, I try, because I
I mean,
mean,
I came from an independent minion where every I had to be dotted and every T had to be crossed, and it was a lot longer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, especially when it comes to sermons, that somebody once said that, like, if you're talking for 12 minutes and you haven't yet struck oil, stop boring.
I guess
Um,
it's from being in the military. When I first started going, I didn't pay attention how long it was. That was like the last thing on my mind. I mean, I was down there. It had been a week since I'd been down there, and I was like an hour away. So the rabbi could go on 3 hours. And I'd been just fine with that. But I'm just thinking, if you're really in the military system, you haven't got 2 hours to do a service, assuming they can get however many Jews the rabbi thinks he needs. If he if he got 10, it'd be nice. But if he gets enough, has enough to have a service, I don't think he's going to be having no 2 hours to do a Saturday morning service. He's going to have to somehow make this shorter.
there are ways to do it. And now there is the challenge of, at a certain point, there is a challenge of sacrificing content, um, which some people might say, oh, well, that's a good thing. I will I will tell you, I don't know if I mentioned this before. When I when I was serving the conservative synagogue in Buffalo, New York, I started working there in mid 2020, which, as you might remember, that was during the sort of the peak time, if you will, of the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, and when we were able to gather, in modest amounts and spread out and all these different things, um, wearing masks, all the whole nine yards. Um, One of the things that the doctors in the community would tell us is that um, you have to make the service as fast as possible in order to for the sake of everybody's safety. So for and that was especially, and they also said that regarding high holidays, which was, I mean, my first year of high holidays in sort of the fall of 2020, what did we do? I think what we did was, I think the entire Rosh Hashanah morning service was 2.5 hours long, which on one hand felt very strange. Um, but that was what we were told, do this as quickly as you can, shorten what you're able to, and, do a sermon of, reasonable length, the whole thing. Um, I don't remember I mean, I don't remember everything we did to ensure that, but we did what we could. Um, it was certainly a unique experience. So yeah. Um, so so I do want to also mention, just getting back to the idea of Kaddish. One thing that when I mentioned the number of loved ones, um, there are a couple of sort of kind of unrelated things that I should note. First of all, if someone has converted to Judaism, once they have converted, they are still eligible, and therefore strongly encouraged to recite Kaddish at the appropriate times for close relatives who have died, whether or not those relatives are Jewish. Right? It doesn't matter about their status. What matters is your status, which I think is a good thing because your, the idea is that, the Kaddish is supposed to, mainly provide structure and ritual for the mourner. Obviously, you're doing so to remember somebody important in your life, but uh, so it's whether or not the person was Jewish is immaterial in this case, right? If you are Jewish and if it is an appropriate time to say Kaddish, you should say Kaddish.
Well, I have a question about dates. Okay, so we have,
Sure.
like George's parents were not Jewish, and we say Kaddish for them on the Hebrew date, because the dates really aren't significant to us from when they died. But we have a daughter-in-law, we had a daughter-in-law, sorry,
It's okay. It's okay.
1 second, who died October 30th, 2023.
Mhm.
And you may recall that was a very bad month.
Yes, it was.
And that date is very significant to us, October 30th, and we were there when she died. And so we've been saying Kaddish for her according to that date. We haven't converted it to the Hebrew date. I mean, are we doing something wrong or does it really not matter? I mean, and she wasn't Jewish and she was a daughter-in-law, so I don't know what to say. That's just what we've been doing.
So what you're saying, so obviously I know we're just a few days removed from the anniversary, so I'm
That's all right.
obviously very, very sorry.
Thanks.
And so that actually leads me into my other point. So I'm glad
Okay.
I appreciate you bringing it up. Um, okay, so in other words, yeah, if like this will happen from time to time, whether or not you are, if you're choosing an English state or, the Hebrew date, you forgot to say it on the Hebrew date, or you thought it was one date, but you got mixed up, whatever it is. I still believe that like saying Kaddish, close to the time, I mean, it's better than not at all. You still, because again, it is for your comfort and memory. And so if it isn't the exact, you know, anniversary according to this custom, it's really not um, no harm done, I don't think. Um, and right, and if you choose October 30th, I mean, who am I to to say that you should do otherwise? It's not um the idea is for you to hold that person in your memory and to talk to God during that time. So that's the main thing.
I
Thanks.
appreciate you asking that, Janet, 'cause our youngest son died on November the 12th,
Mhm.
and shouldn't be, but it's a lot easier to remember. It was the day after Veterans Day, and we'll never forget it. And he lived and died. He was Jewish. He was bar mitzvah and confirmed and everything, but he lived and died by the regular calendar. So that's why we use that. And it may be wrong, but that's just what we do.
I don't think it's a matter of like right or wrong. I think it's, listen, uh, any, we can always, I mean, the synagogue office or actually, I mean, and actually I know of a website that we may or may not have discussed here, that, can convert any Hebrew date to an English date, meaning like we can look up when you would say Kaddish for a loved one from now until the end of time. We can always do that. But again, my point is not so much that like, okay, it has to be according to the Hebrew calendar. It has to be like, I mean, if you're choosing a day to remember somebody, okay, that's the idea is to treat. I believe in treating these things with compassion, and not being so tied to the letter of the law that wanting to make it so that we want to make it meaningful. Um, and so along that question you asked, Janet, you mentioned about your daughter-in-law. Um, so I consider myself fortunate that both my parents are still living, and well, I'm fortunate in many ways with that. But um, I haven't had to say Kaddish for them. I haven't had to say Kaddish for anyone in the categories that I had mentioned for a child, a spouse, a sibling, or a parent. Um, However, I had, close relationships with my grandparents. One in particular, I was very close to. Um, and so so one of my grandparents died when my mother was 9 years old. The other three, though, I knew pretty well, and those three have all died within the last 15 years. And so, I knew them as when I was a kid. I knew them as an adult. They all met at least one of my children, so they each got to at least experience a moment of being a great grandparent. Um, and absolutely, I say Kaddish for them. I absolutely do. It's not required, but it's meaningful to me. Um, and again, I don't think anyone in their right mind would say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." Right? Okay, maybe I'm not required to, but to say, you know, don't do that, right? That's wrong. It's not wrong. Um, and uh, we also and there are those who extend that a little bit. And again, I think this is totally fine. They extend that idea to people that maybe there's no one to say Kaddish for. There are some people who have the custom of reciting Kaddish all the time, every time that there's an opportunity to say Mourner's Kaddish, because they are keeping in mind the 6 million Jews massacred in the Holocaust. Because the feeling of those who hold that custom is no one, there's no one saying, there might not be anybody else saying Kaddish for them. It's not a custom that I necessarily hold, but again, it's not wrong.
A lot of them have no descendants because,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's not a personal custom of mine, but that doesn't, but again, there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. So, um, and so my feeling is to be as permissive as we can regarding the recitation of Kaddish. The one thing I do hold is the idea of um, making sure that we have that minyan, making sure that we have that prayer quorum of at least 10 Jewish adults, because I think it is essential for the maintenance and continuation of Jewish community, certainly of a Jewish religious community. So, other questions regarding that?
I do, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Um, could you please talk a little bit about this concept of community? Because in my couple years of association with Heskamuna, it looks to me like the people in our demographics, and I'm kind of grouping this group together, are were the hardcore attendees of Shabbat services, but I'm not around the younger generation very much. And lately, actually, there's some new families at Heskamun, and I see them on Zoom on Shabbat. But can you talk about the younger generations and how we're developing and trying to encourage this idea of community?
So, um, so we're getting into some sort of larger issues here, and it's a good question, right? It's a good question because in terms of synagogue demographics and community demographics, it's a challenging thing. Um, One thing I can tell you is that, I mean, I started attending services in my home community when I was like pretty much like bar mitzvah and up. That's when I became a regular synagogue attendee. So I've been doing so for, since 1989. And what I have noticed is that in many communities, the idea of the idea of the of synagogue attendees tending to be um, on the closer to retiree age, I'll put it that way. Um, that the majority often are. That remains constant, right? So the challenge that so many congregations feel over the generations is, oh, well, where are we going to find people who can, it's like we have, we have so many people who are of the older demographic, who's going to replace them? And what often happens is that slowly over the course of time, yes, maybe some of the older people become too frail to attend regularly or they pass away. And other times, but many times there are people who go from that sort of the young adult or adults of young children, part of their lives to when they're empty nesters, and those empty nesters begin to attend synagogue more. So there is kind of a cyclical nature to it. That's not to say that having that younger, that we shouldn't worry about there being younger attendees to synagogue. Quite the contrary. I mean, we want to have as many people as possible. We want to have it as multi-generational as we can. So I'm not trying to dismiss the idea of that, but I think that is a trend that has sort of gone throughout. Is that um, those who are in sort of the empty nesters who begin to attend synagogue then become older and what have you, and then maybe they stop attending because of their health concerns or if they pass away, and they are often replaced by other empty nesters and others, etc. So that's something that has generally existed. With that said, yeah, the more we can have people who have, the more young people at a synagogue, the earlier we can get people to attend synagogue, the better. There's no question, because we want to be able to serve Jewish communities for all ages if we can. Um, so there are a couple of trends that have existed in general. One of the trends in I would say going back, I don't know, 50 years or so, as a general thing. It was understood in general that if you were, settled in a community, that it's like joining a synagogue. That's what you did. That's what you did. You joined a synagogue. You made sure that your kids, had, had some sort of Jewish education, that they, had a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. It's like being in synagogue, like joining a synagogue was something that you just did. Um, some things have changed since then. First of all, the average age of settling down, if you will, or at least what we would typically say settling down, has gone up. The typical age of one getting married or being in a long-term serious relationship, that has gone up. The age in which adults start having children of their own has gone up. Right? People are settling into things later, the things that we have typically, the aspects of what we would typically call adulting is not happening as early as it did a couple generations ago. For better, for worse, however you want to put it. It's the reality of things. And with that has come a reluctance to join a synagogue at a young age. Just doesn't happen very much these days. As much as we wish it wouldn't, we encourage that, to take place. Another factor with that is not only the question of one's familial status, the issue of the expense of modern life, including, very importantly, debt from higher education, is a major reason why there are people who say, I have to deal with my student loans. Like and look, do synagogues understand that? I think we understand it better than we used to. But one response that many synagogues have had to this was to do these financial incentives to get them to join. Right? To say, okay, membership is free if you're under 30, or or if you get married at this, under synagogue auspices, then your first year's membership is free, or it's, or you can pay $180, which is, a mere fraction of what synagogue membership usually costs. You can pay $180 and you get it for free, and then you get your membership. Or some places say no membership fees at all. The challenge becomes with that, when are people going to realize that not everything is free all your life, right? I mean, you can't, at a certain point you have to, at a certain point the lights have to stay on. At a certain point, synagogue has to pay its bills. At a certain point, and I know, I apologize for sounding self-serving, but if you want professional leadership, it costs money.
Well, I know it's been settled for various reasons thousands of years ago, but Judaism made it as difficult as possible for a male to join, to convert to Judaism as possible. A woman You just had to marry a Jewish man, pretty much, and then learn the rules and stuff. That's not a big deal. But when you ask a man to have a circumcision and learn Hebrew, can you really get problems? That's to me one of the biggest reasons why Christianity grew and Judaism didn't. I understand why they didn't. There's self-protection, all this, but this is not back when their split started. I mean, that's how they got people to join. Oh, you don't have to do all this. You don't have to do all, you don't have to get circumcised. You don't have to learn a foreign language. Well, Judaism made the decision, has kept that decision to make it as difficult as possible for a man to join. And I understand, my opinion is why women can join so easily is because, if in a war and you conquer a country and you want to marry the women or you want to take the women, that's fine. But you don't want the competition from the men. So you'll take the women and let them join as easy as possible. But you don't want other men for competition. So you made it as difficult as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm more. That's more of a. I think that's more of an like I mean that dates back more of an ancient
Right, right.
factor. I mean, uh, so yeah, I mean, look, there are. Yeah, look, I would say
But
that
we're
there
not
are.
going to grow.
Right, I mean, look, there are certain barriers of entry
Right.
that Judaism has. I mean, there's no question. There are certain ways that um, we we do make it a challenge. But but I would say in any Jewish community, um, I would say those who are not affiliated, depending on the community, outnumber those who are affiliated. In fact, sometimes by large percentage point, by a large gap. Um, so yeah, so there's so Catherine, perhaps you're getting more than you bargained for with the question, but it's a good one, and it's one that we continue to grapple with.
Well,
Um,
I do have a follow-up kind of a question.
sure.
Personally, I find it hard to stay focused for 2+ hours on a service.
Okay.
So how do you get the young people, those young children that are attending, to focus? And I don't know, it just seems very challenging for many reasons.
So, if I can give a
Because it's part of
yeah.
developing the community is attending together in person.
Right. So I have uh, a shameless, not self-promotion, but shameless promotion for Heskamuna, which is that this coming Saturday there's going to be I think we're calling it Family Shabbat. I'm actually gonna I'm gonna be in town. I'm gonna be I'm getting to Knoxville this Tuesday afternoon, and it's a service that Rabbi Shush Carson, like she runs the service, but I'm going to actually be there, which is not usually how we do it. Usually, I show up on weeks where we run the traditional service, but the thought is we're trying this, we're trying this instead, where I mean, I'll still run Friday night services. I'll be doing my normal things when I'm in town. Um, but for Saturday morning, I'm going to sort of be a like sort of like the supplementary leader for the service. I'm going to do the Torah readings, and I'm also going to at different points, like there'll be points where the kids where we like it's like, okay, the kids are going to be in for this part of the service, and then we'll take them out and have this little educational opportunity, and then they'll come back and like sort of it's sort of a back and forth thing. So, yeah, I no, I mean it's true. I think that in many cases, the way you have younger families engage in Saturday morning services is kind of have do a combination of things, have sort of like things in the sanctuary for them and things outside of it. And they're both uh, sort of briefer than the full service. That way you're kind of, look, we have shorter attention spans. What can I tell you? So, all right, listen, um, uh, tangents are fine, and I'm, and it's good. And I really appreciate the discussion we had, especially regarding Kaddish. We will talk more about prayer in general next week. So I
Did
thank
you give a
you.
quick explanation of how you do your Friday night services? Are you live in person or Zoom?
This coming week, I will be in person, but there is always a Zoom option for Friday night services. But I will be in person at the sanctuary this week. And I forgot to mention, Judaism 101 next Sunday, a week from today. I will be at the synagogue. You are welcome to be there with me in person. Of course, we will run the Zoom as normal. So you can feel free to log in from wherever you like. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, and appreciate the discussion. We'll see you soon.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.